But of course, those are not the main tenets of the arguments tonight. I'm sure you have your own interpretation and sense-making of what was going on in this podium. So I'm going to defer to you to ask the questions from the panel in terms of how you have received and you are reflecting and analyzing the presentations that you had tonight.
I'm just making an observation of history. My take is when, let me give you my premise first. It looks like Marxism is itself inherently contradictory to the development of the so-called third world countries. I will explain this. Remember when Marxism developed, it talked of a division of classes, the appropriation of labor. And Marx envisaged that this would continue throughout the whole world. But when colonialism came to Africa, it found Africa at a certain level of development, of socio-economic development, which has resisted for a long time to be taken over by capital. So in a sense, if we say it's just my thinking, if we say we are using as Africans, or actually I don't prefer the word African Marxist. I think as Marxists, if we say Marxism will be relevant, we also need to challenge and question whether will it be able, if it analyzes the progression of classes the way it is, division of labor, will it be able to bring an equity that we, the third world countries, perhaps has become, what is the word? I'm short of a very good vocabulary for you academics here, which has become a dream perhaps for those from the third world countries, because we seem to be saying, let us develop let us seek development, let's seek development under the same socio-economic formation. Whereas it is inherently contradictory to where we were. Thank you.
One of the aspirations actually in 2063 is that they want to create an inclusive growth and sustainable development here in Africa. And I so liked what Professor Mzala said earlier on, saying that Africa is highly reliant on international investments. So my question is that how do we ensure that these investments are for the betterment of our people, and that our people here in Africa get to benefit from these investments?
I want to engage the panel, the program director, on what they've already shared with us, actually, from Mzala to Prof. Zovu, Bacheni, and also not forgetting Professor Nxumalo. On one, the quantum theory that Prof. Mzala is telling us. To the upholding of the colonial conquest, the legacy of colonial conquest of these institutions of higher learning, to the cognitive injustice that Prof. Bacheni is talking about. Now, I want to intertwine these issues and say, if indeed these institutions are led by people like Prof. Mzala who understand quantum theory, who embrace the idea that plurality of knowledge must be also engaged in massive discourse on the fact that knowledge is not one, and moving universities from being a manufacturing firm of graduates into a lifestyle center of teaching and learning for our communities. And we see that universities have not taken the posture that they've imagined themselves to be as a center of teaching and learning and community engagement and research, of course. Universities have placed themselves as an area that, one, is for a particular class, a particular race in our case in South Africa, Two, because like right now in the protests, and I want to touch on Mzala's idea on how the revolution needs to unfold. Because the ANC of Mzala was an ANC that did not want a handout liberation. And the ANC of 94 was a different ANC that negotiated, and the youth of today started to question that liberation was a handout. And that is why we are not benefiting on the human rights that are cognizant with a democratic state like we claim to be having in South Africa. And what does that mean to us to have these discussions at the institution of learning and discuss these issues that we differ in knowledge, because we were taken, we are a people who are conquered and taken from our indigenous places for me to be in a university, I must leave to Doni to come to Johannesburg. And I must be schooled and taught the way Johannesburg imagines itself. Like Prof. Kachen was saying, is this a university in Johannesburg or a university of Johannesburg? Is this university really teaching me or equipping me to go and move barriers that are in our communities today? Today I'm an engineer, like Prof. Marola was saying, that we are producing less engineers in Africa with all the numbers that we have. An unemployed engineer, how can we have an unemployed engineer in Africa that is failing to produce engineers? It means this knowledge that we gain in these universities are not enough to transform our communities, because in my community we do not have proper infrastructure. In my community we are affected by load shedding. I'm an electrical engineer. In my community we are affected by water and sanitation. What does it mean for me to wake up to that community every day and be called an engineer who cannot help his very community? And that is what I want to pose today, that Mzee said the principal thing to do, one, is to take the power from the minority to the mass of our people. Number two, destroy the pillars and the forms of governance that were previously governing us. And number three, teach new forms of government to our people. And how do we then arm our people? Because Mzee believed in the armed struggle as well. And if we say today we are not arming our people with AK-47, how are we arming them today to be prepared for the revolution that we're talking about, of the fourth industrial revolution? Thank you.
You mentioned that the number of bachelor's degrees in engineering have, 1,500, they're quite small in proportion to the population of South Africa, but you're only looking at university. And I think this is the beginning of the problem. SASCO right now and the Young Communist League of South Africa have a campaign of TVETs and Australians. And you're speaking particularly of skill development. So I'd like to hear your view on that firstly, but also get an understanding as to why many engineers are going to, and it's not many engineers are getting into banks. It's black engineers in particular, because if you go to UP and you go to the engineering campus there, they get jobs immediately. Whereas if you go to Wits University, which is predominantly black people, they don't get jobs. They get to banks. And if you look at our PhD students in engineering, in sciences, they're never used for anything. The Dinero cyclone, I just realized recently, was sometime 2015, around this time, when it was happening, we have very key PhD scholars who could have given analysis and even worked on what's happening, but because of what Professor Ndlovu was speaking about, how knowledge is disseminated and the problems have come in. And I think the other question is, I'm going to ask you around the commercialization of universities, looking in particular at your university. Unfortunately, the VC and you did say because it's a space of ideas, so we're going to ask you specifically questions. So in this university, one of the things that happens is when you're writing a thesis from master's going to PhD, we are told immediately as you enter that, listen, when you're doing this thesis, you must ensure that you write what the supervisor wants. You don't have your own ideas. this is what Du Bois was speaking about, right? Du Bois was speaking about Harvard. That ultimately his PhD was not his, it was the university's. And this is what we're seeing, that we're not actually producers of knowledge. We don't become innovative because of the limitations of the university itself. This goes back to Comrade Joe's question of is the university for Africa or not? Because maybe innovation is not what we want. We want people who have degrees and PhDs, etc., but are not able to become innovators, to come up with solutions that are needed in society. And then I'm so honored to see you.
Your last one.
This is my last one.
Okay,
I'm honored to see you, Professor Xian. And I think my question to you is not really a question, but I just wanted to, I agree completely with the intersectionality where you come from. I mean, I agree completely, doesn't speak on trust, but I just wanted to mention the issue of burning of the paintings. And I just wanted to mention what Jacob David speaks about, the smokes of that cause. And he speaks about it because sometimes the only way to get to it, when you're oppressed, the oppressor doesn't ask you what's the right way to fight. No, because Sachi was having a march yesterday, and they tell you that when I'm marching, I must go and ask my oppressor if I can march to section 77. So how then do we say it's okay to burn and what not to burn? Because ultimately, if we are saying right now, the people that were fighting in universities in the past, your Professor Mzala, your Professor Ndlovu, your Professor, your Franz Valeni, these companies were fighting a long time ago and fighting in the university spaces, and now we feel that they're not hearing us. The only way I can get your attention is if I touch you where you can actually look at me. So here's the question: do we understand what the smoke that calls means? Because it speaks to essentially the struggle in itself. And Comrade Lobu, I just said, and I think the issue of peace must fall, when you speak about it comes from Fanon and people, I think you speak of a section certain, a certain section of the peace must fall. Peace must fall was very broad. There were Marxists there, there were feminists there, and there were many issues that were spoken about in Peace Must Fall. In fact, Peace Must Fall is still continuing today, the ideas that were in Peace Must Fall. So I think it's very important that even when we theorize what we as young people were fighting about, we don't separate us from what we're doing, and we were definitely not moving away from Marxism at that point. Marxism is not a passive ideology. It's not one that says sit and listen and don't do anything. It's a very active ideology, and that's one of the reasons why Marxists, young communists all over the world, that's one of the reasons why the left all over the world is fighting against what the US is doing to people, what's happening in South Africa. It's one of the reasons why the left is here. It's not a passive ideology. So I think it's problematic to even assume it as a passive ideology, because it's a call to action at all times.
Yes.
Let me start by saying Cortez was seriously impoverished by the absence of Mzala.
Oh.
His paper on the national question is actually premised on who tells the African story. It's a national question addressing who writes about us. Now, Ambassador Nxumalo has written a book recently. And I like the book because he's from Vryheid, the same region Mzala is from. And he starts by giving a history of Vryheid I have never read before. Why? Because the history we've read of Vryheid was written mostly about the conquers or the battles where the Afrikaners had conquered and named Vryheid. But the history that he now begins to show us is a history of places that mourn or how they were formed. How forced removals actually happened in Vryheid. Then it brings the question of language. You see, unless African languages are languages of business, they will never become relevant. And I think that battle, that's why I'm talking about Cortez. We lost a Cortez. Our languages are official languages, but they're not languages of business. Languages of business is English and Afrikaans. The president signs an act of parliament in English and Afrikaans. So we have lost that battle. And the question for me is, how do we complete the decolonization project? Because unless your language is a language of business, then you are not yet decolonized. Unless racially, you are classified according to where you can, even though there's no law that says live here, but the economic conditions dictate that this is where you live. So our special development still remains colonial. So there's a decolonization project that is still incomplete. So that's the first part. The second question I have relates to class and race. South Africa, the South African struggle has always been portrayed as a racial struggle against racial oppression. And the class element of it has always been neglected. As a result of that, we have fallen into the trap observed by Franz Fanon, where he says, when liberation movements take over, there is no change in the oppression of the poor. The poor remain oppressed. The only thing that changes is the color of the oppressor. So we find that even today, where in fact, all we are finding, in fact, in South Africa as well, we have not even changed the color of the oppressor. We are merely diluting it. So we're having a few more of us among the class of the, and that element, because we neglected it in the struggle, we continue to neglect it today. And as a result, we are going to experience what Marx says, and I'll paraphrase it. He says, I think he's quoting Hegel, when he says, every event that happens in history happens twice. And we may find ourselves in a situation where the first element has happened, but because our decolonization is not complete, it may have to happen again. And the elements that we are raising of the roads, the fees must fall, they might be leading towards something. And mine is to say, how do we complete this decolonization project? One. Two, how do we bring about or elevate the question of class in the liberation discussions of South Africa?
Thank you.
My name is Mzala. Two issues that I wanted to raise directed to Professor Shehi. First of all, Prof, in your own understanding, what is the relevance of Nxumalo's teachings and legacy in making the South African Communist Party to fulfill its own historical mission? In the years leading to 2000, you had a lot of exchanges and polemics with the then first deputy secretary of the SACP, Jeremy Cronin. Actually helped him to even characterize the ANC as xenophobe at some point, leading up to the exchanges between the ANC and the party, but also that it was the fight between the capitalists and from within the ANC and the working class, because COSATU was at the forefront in joining the battle with the party. You remember during the period of the 1996 class project, which was referred to there. So at that point, I think some of the exchanges have actually happened. So that is one. Secondly, there's a doctor at UCT by the name of Loazi. He studied at Wits, where I was. So the doctor is the leading proponent of the decolonial struggles and decolonial education. So I just want to check from yourself and the rest of the panel your deep interpretation of what constitutes decolonial education. Why I'm raising the example of Comrade Loazi is precisely because the comrade was victimized. The comrades came with unconventional methods of training and teaching students, inviting the fees must fall, the follists, to come and demonstrate to the class. But the white establishment were uncomfortable with the ways and methods of the follists. Whereas Dr. Lwazi was simply bringing a new version of the protest. It was during the protest movement, and he was victimized, and he has always been a lone voice because he did not get the support, precisely because he wanted to change. Not only did he want to theorize the decolonial education, but he wanted, through practice, to actually change the character and the ways of teaching, at the university. Thanks.
Thanks as well. Now I'm going to give over to my panel. Do you want to start, Professor? Let's defer to the guest.
Well, I didn't hear a lot in the way of questions to me,
Yes.
but what I did hear is an engagement of everyone who spoke up with the process of transformation, and people articulating their own way of thinking about, and seriously, from what I hear, seriously thinking about the relationship between race and class and gender, and what to do about it, because as, where is she, made the point that there's an activist tone to all of this. It's not just how are we going to conceptualize all of this, but what are we going to do about it? I'd like to say something about the other speakers and what they had to say. I think that Professor Nxumalo and I mostly agree. Do you not think so? A lot of people agree with an awful lot of what Marxists think, and we agree with an awful lot of what they think, and there's everything doesn't have to be 100% agreeing on everything. But I think that, I certainly find myself in agreement with most of what's been said here this evening. I do disagree with what Professor Mzala said about quantum theory and Marxism. I don't accept that statement of what quantum theory is. I don't think it's true that quantum theory holds that that a thing can be in two places at the same time. What Heisenberg's theory of uncertainty states is that a thing you cannot determine with exactitude both the position and the velocity of an electron at the same time, but you can determine with exactitude either the velocity or the position, and you can determine both with a pretty near degree of accuracy. That's not massive chaotic uncertainty and anything goes. It does not undermine determinism. It in no way, you can't really talk about anything seriously without causality and determination and consequences. But there's a whole long history of all kinds of philosophical interpretations of quantum physics, and Marxism has for many decades engaged with these other interpretations of quantum physics, and I'm just putting myself on the record here now as disagreeing with that particular interpretation of quantum physics. Because you do say that determinism is essential to Marxism. Yes, it is. So I'm defending determinism in Marxism against that interpretation of quantum theory. But this question that you've raised about how to fight, I've been around on the left for many decades now, and I've evolved my thinking about that not only in universities but on the streets, and changed over the years. You definitely do learn from experience. But I did answer specifically in terms of what to burn. I think that there were things at UCT that were worth burning, Smuts and Prince of Wales, but not the paintings of Karasi Mosi Boholo, not the Jamie Shuttle, not university buildings and transport. I think that these things, people get very excited and very angry, but I think there are things not to burn. I just want to say I'm very engaged by the various voices, and I just want to affirm most of what other people have said. And I don't need to go point by point through everything anybody has said here, but I'm quite impressed.
Thanks. Can I please please, Prof, can I ask Professor Marwala to respond? He has another engagement at 9:30. So if he can just take the questions. Thanks. And apologies for him ahead of his departure. After he leaves, I will be the Vice Chancellor, only for that time, until the...
No, thank you very much. I'm also quite impressed about your understanding of quantum mechanics, but I don't agree with you. I think Heisenberg is really about observation, not the state of objects. How do we ensure that foreign investments are used to our advantage? I think what we need to understand is that the fundamental principle of humans is maximizing their utility. And as a result of that, if we are not vigilant, these investments that come into the country, they are not going to be in our favor. So vigilance is very, very important. We should not lose control, or if we do not have control of the rules of the game, we need to seize control of the rules of the games. And of course, that will require us to have certainly intellectual resources to be able to do that. I am not going to, Mangaliso, I'm not going to comment on quantum theory, but the idea of destroying in order to create, I have a problem with that. Especially if you are destroying books. I mean, when there is a saying that when a society is about to collapse, you see them by starting to ban books. So this concept of when societies once you start symbolically destroying ideas, then you are killing society. So I don't subscribe in the banning of libraries. I actually think it is counter-revolutionary, if I were to use that language. So I think I do agree that there are people who feel that they are so voiceless that the only way in which they can be able to resolve their issues, they have to get into violence. But certainly, when you destroy a piece of art, that is not for you. It is for hopefully the next 100 generations that are going to come after you. It means you are basically saying, I should be the last one to see this. And I think that is fundamentally selfish. You can't be the last one to see art. You have to, the future generations actually have the right to see it. Now, how do we educate that? Because what has really happened is that we have been consumers of technology, not producers. We have been consumers of knowledge and not producers. When I was an undergraduate student in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio, I had a classmate from South Korea, Steve Chong. And then I was actually quite good. I got better grades than him. He called me the other time and he was asking me, I don't see your products here. What happened to your engineering? I went to the shop, I see Samsung phones here, and I'm sure you must be seeing my products there where you are in South Africa. Obviously, Korea makes Samsung phones. But I went to the shop and looked for South African phones. I can't see any. Why don't you export them to South Africa, to Korea? Or your engineering did not work for you? So I guess what he was saying was that knowledge that is not productive. And production is not just about physical goods. It can be also, it can also be, in our minds. Things don't have to be tangible to be production. But knowledge that is not productive, knowledge that is not used, is no knowledge at all. So what we are doing is to give you, is actually, and I started talking about new programs that we're introducing, is basically to create knowledge, to give you knowledge that you can be able to use. Quite a great deal has been said about commercialization. We are producers of knowledge. I know quite a great deal of knowledge that has been produced here. I mean, we know about the solar panels, that knowledge that we have produced. What we are not good at is actually to use that knowledge for the benefit of our people. Those theses that you see in the library, there has to be something new about them for them to pass. And I am quite convinced, and I saw the Dean of Science here can even testify, that quite a great deal of our work even end up as patents, international patents. And these international patents are being exploited. Some of them are being sold, So we are innovative. Maybe we can do more in order to even increase innovation. But I think what we need to do is to look around at problems and try to solve them. I was in the last few days I was studying Google Translate. How many of you have used Google Translate? I have. So, and what has really shocked me about Google Translate is that if you translate from English to isiZulu, it is more accurate than if you translate from isiZulu to English. Because the person who actually created it is not a native English isiZulu speaker. And I went to Google Translate. I put the word, and you can put it, for those of you who have it now. I put a Zulu expression, akwehlanga lungehlanga. I can tell you, it was not even close to what it means. You can try it, by the way, And I tried words after words. This thing claims to translate to isiZulu. It does not. And the reason for that is because it is being created in Los Angeles, in Silicon Valley, not at Mahlabatini, in KZN. I guess what I'm saying is that these are problems that are at your disposal. Find solutions for them. Creativity, innovation is really about finding solutions to problems that are around you. And there are lots of problems around you. We give you the tools to be able to create, to build things, to be able to analyze, to be able to connect. What you need to do is obviously to use those tools in order to solve the problems that are around you. I'm not going to talk about language and our negotiated settlement. I think I'm going to leave it to the experts to deal with that issue. Thank you very much. I'm not running from the students. I actually do have a call. There is this funder who has promised me that he's going to give me 100 bursaries that are for your benefit. So I'm actually leaving because of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, VC. Thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Gate.
I think what came to me was a very clear question, Dineo, about the multi-class and the multi-ideological movement. I totally agree with you. But what I think maybe I didn't come out clearly, I never said Marxism is a passive ideology. I think where we ended up agreeing, I have this approach that knowledge is built on each other. is not always about this one against that other knowledge. And I see no antagonism between decolonization and the Marxism. I think it played a major role in that. That's why I spoke about stretching rather than abandoning. And I think that's the message which I wanted to put forward. Then the second one from, is it Mzwake, about Lushaba. I know him very well, Dr. Lushaba. I know the issues which took place. But I think the issue is new pedagogies will never just be accepted. They are part of the struggle. And to expect that you just put them across and they be accepted is very problematic. I actually work in administration. In administration, the major problem is you come in for transformation, but every time you are told to comply with what exists. And that's a contradiction which we live with on a daily basis.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much. I have been sensitized that the family and the guests and the panelists have rather had a long day. I know that we had lunch with Professor Kaltini very early on at about 12. So I'm just going to ask that this last round is handled rather in that kind of sensitive way.
My name is Dominic Tweedy. My question is like this. The unfinished business of Marxism, as I believe it to be, is the question of the relations of production that are supposed to follow after capitalism.
Yeah.
Is it coming across? I can't tell.
Yes.
Okay. The question is also the same as the withering away of the state. The question is postponed. It's supposed to be parked during a period of the dictation of the proletariat, and then, according to Lenin in the State of Revolution, the urgent business is to deal with that. Otherwise, the proletariat continues to dictate over capitalism and the employment relations of capitalism. The question of how to conceive of a new relations of production, by the way, is also postponed by our Communist Party, which wants to talk about the developmental state, which is content to talk about the state as if it's not ever going to go away, and we talk about employment and so on. Employment is capitalism. So the unfinished business is there. Now that unfinished business can only probably be dealt with if there are adequate philosophers to do it. And that's the crisis that I see, and I wanted to ask Professor Sheehan especially, because she's such a pillar of strength, really, for us, but there aren't enough of the Sheehans in this world who are going to do that work of projecting forward. I see she's frowning. Let me say, let me remind ourselves what happened in the 1840s. There was a festival of philosophy, furious controversy of all kinds and sorts, which Engels describes very well. Professor Sheehan, you describe yourself, or you are described as believing that Marxism is the indispensable philosophy of our time. I agree, but it still leaves us with that problem to be solved. Obviously, the Vice Chancellor was talking in the same language. We have an unfinished business. Then how are we going to deal with that? Because we don't have that festival of philosophy similar to what happened in the 1840s. And it seems to be diminishing. Well, that's a crisis I see, and I want to know what you academic people like myself have got got to say about it. Thank you very much.
Question about is it ontological density of the people? I think the issue of ontological density emerges from an analysis which says that modernity tended to unfold in terms of social classification of human species. Socially classify them, then you racially hierarchize them. And when you socially classify them, then you racially hierarchize them. What happens is that some gain a higher ontological density and others a lower ontological density. And the issue, when we take it then to the knowledge domain, is that those with less ontological density automatically have less epistemic virtue in whatever they say. Is not actually taken seriously. And Prof. Marola was saying it here that, but we produce knowledge. But as long as your being human is not recognized, even the knowledge which you produce is inferior. That's the reality of it. But taking it to the next issue which I spoke about as I was sitting down here, when I was saying, but I'm a product of the modern university. What I was trying to drive at was that the major problem is the problem of consciousness. How do we develop another consciousness which will lead to liberation? That was simply where I was trying to drive at.
Thank you. About Marxism and the situation it's in at the moment, it's definitely not at a high point. Marxism is very marginalized within the universities and also within popular movements. It's a minority position. And what to do about that? What to do about it is to live it and to you see, the problem is that, Marxism is an unfinished thing. It's a thrust to totality, but it's not a completed, totalized thing. But the fact that it has this thrust to totality is what makes it so essential, not only to the search for knowledge in our universities, but to the struggle for justice on the streets. And those of us who are convinced that the Marxist perspective is unsurpassed and indispensable have a big job to do to convince people of that in the universities and the streets and all of the... I mean, my idea of a strategy for the left is the long march through the institutions of society. And it's a long, hard struggle. And I became active in the left in the 1960s when it seemed as if the wind was at our backs. And the tide turned. And a lot of people who seemed to be with us then fell away. And it's very difficult to keep going after defeat after defeat after defeat. And in a situation of marginalization. But the fact is that, there is nothing else on the horizon which explains contemporary experience as well as Marxism. There is nothing close. The other contenders philosophically are various varieties of positivism and neopositivism and postmodernism. Although they seem to be opposite, they have a lot in common, is they're both fragmenting. As they're the culture of late capitalism. The irony is that capitalism is the most totalizing, systematizing system of reality that the world has ever produced. And yet, at the same time, paradoxically, it systematically undermines systemic thinking. So that people don't see it as a system, don't name it as a system. But it's precisely in naming the system and analyzing the system and struggling against the system in this totalizing way, that's what makes Marxism indispensable and still unsurpassed. And even if we're marginalized, there's all the more work for us to do to make the point. But it's no use just kind of, claiming authority and quoting books on shelves. It has to be fought for and engaged where the arguments are and where the struggle is.
Thank you very much to my panel. Thank you for those answers. And thank you to everybody who's here, but it's not my role to thank you. I'm going to call upon quickly the CEO of the Mzala Nxumalo Center, Mr. Jabulani Sithole, to come and thank you properly. Please do not leave because we have a Valentine's cocktail outside.
Yeah, good evening. I'm not actually going to be long, given the fact that I realize that the day is gone, and my job, of course, is to thank you all. Let me first of all thank the university leadership, particularly under the executive under leadership of Professor Marwala in absentia, and thank the council members who may still be here, and thank everyone for being here. But I would actually be going amiss if I don't recognize and thank the Mzala Nxumalo family, Sisimpo and the children, the grandparents, the board members of the Mzala Nxumalo Center. And I'm actually starting there because I would want all of us to actually join me in thanking the three speakers, particularly Professor Marwala was supposed to be opening and giving the opening remarks. But quite honestly, if you look at the interventions and the inputs, they were up to the level that one would actually be associating with Mzala. But also, I think quite importantly as well, is to thank Professor Sheehan for having taken time all the way from Dublin to be with us here. And in a very, very important lecture, it's the first of the Mzala Nxumalo lecture at the University of Johannesburg after that MOU. And we are quite honored that you have actually taken time and graced us with that lecture here. But let me also thank Professor Ndlovu Kajeni. And thank all of you. I think I was listening very attentively sitting down there. The kinds of questions that were being raised for me are quite relevant for what the legacy of Mzala should be. Mzala Nxumalo was a person who thought outside the box. I'm not so sure whether you'd have broken the box because I'm being very cautious after people saying, no, we don't have to break things. He never took anything at face value. He questioned everything. And the biographer that we have at the Mzala Nxumalo Center, who's actually writing the biography of Mzala, keeps telling us that those who lived with him will always say that Mzala always did the unpredictable. For instance, when he was told by the senior leadership, don't raise controversial issues in the ANC, he would behave the one meeting. They would actually advise him in the next meeting. He would quietly sit there and then stand up and actually put forward his views, because he was not a person who was going to conform if he thought the intervention was going to make a difference. And from what I've actually heard today, it does say to us who are working on a daily basis, I'm looking at Comrade Derek, but much more importantly, I'm looking at Olusegun and others, and the staff at the Mzala Nxumalo Center. It does say to us the kinds of questions that are being raised here are saying to us we must think critically about ways of engaging, because the questions that were raised here are saying to us, surely the kinds of intervention or knowledge production or problematizing issues of race, gender, and class are issues that we ought to be engaging with because they are all relevant. What is it that we have done in the last 25 years that we can say with certainty that we have moved in a direction where we can still truly say we're a non-racial, non-sexist democratic society, but much more importantly, that there is no exploitation of one person by another. So these are some of the key questions, and those questions we don't have answers for. It's a forum like this, it's participants, it's the activists. Mzala was an activist and would actually want to actually think critically, of course, Sis Linda, and think about ways and means of opening up these sort of engagements so that at least we can begin to address issues that are of concern to us, because the three speakers were saying to us, here are challenges of our times. What do we do about them? there are proposals that are being made, and clearly there is a need for us to actually carry on thinking along the same lines. With those words, I would want to just perhaps say I would like to thank all of you. I know I'm wearing another cap. I was told earlier on the closing remarks were supposed to be done by the Secretary General of the Communist Party, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Dr. Nxumalo. I want to apologize, unfortunately he's not here, and I'm not going to attempt to be Dr. Nxumalo, but I'm sure there would be a lot more that he would have said, especially because he's very passionate about the legacy of Mzala that we should be taking forward, which is relevant now and continues to be relevant, and the kinds of questions that he raised when he passed on in the early 90s are the questions that are still relevant, that still bother us, and the questions that we need to look for answers for. In those ways, I would like to thank all of you for having taken time. Hopefully, in future, we'll be able to engage even more. Thank you.